And if God granted him one more free instant, he would also have time to stab himself and avoid death on a post. This last, however, was of little interest to Levi, the former tax collector. He was indifferent to how he died. He wanted one thing, that Yeshua, who had never in his life done the least evil to anyone, should escape torture. The plan was a very good one, but the fact of the matter was that Levi had no knife with him. Nor did he have a single piece of money. Furious with himself, Levi got out of the crowd and ran back to the city. A single feverish thought was leaping in his burning head: how to procure a knife there in the city, in any way possible, and have time to overtake the procession. He ran up to the city gate, maneuvering amid the throng of caravans being sucked into the city, and saw to his left the open door of a little shop where bread was sold. Breathing hard after running down the scorched road, Levi got control of himself, entered the shop very sedately, greeted the woman behind the counter, asked her to take the top loaf from the shelf, which for some reason he liked better than the others, and when she turned around, silently and quickly took from the counter that than which there could be nothing better, a long, razor-sharp bread knife, and at once dashed out of the shop. A few moments later he was again on the Jaffa road. But the procession was no longer in sight. He ran. At times he had to drop down right in the dust and lie motionless to recover his breath. And so he would lie there, to the astonishment of people riding on mules or walking on foot to Yerushalayim. He would lie listening to his heart pounding not only in his chest but in his head and ears. Having recovered his breath a little, he would jump up and continue running, but ever slower and slower. When he finally caught sight of the long procession raising dust in the distance, it was already at the foot of the hill. "Oh, God!" Levi moaned, realizing that he was going to be too late. And he was too late. When the 4th hour of the execution had gone by, Levi's torments reached their highest degree and he fell into a rage. Getting up from the stone, he flung to the ground the stolen knife, stolen in vain, as he now thought, crushed the flask with his foot, depriving himself of water, threw off his keffiyeh, seized his thin hair, and began cursing himself. He cursed himself, calling out meaningless words, growled and spat, abused his father and mother for bringing a fool into the world. Seeing that curses and abuse had no effect and nothing in the sun-scorched place was changed by them, he clenched his dry fists, raised them, squinting, to the sky, to the sun that was sliding ever lower, lengthening the shadows and going to fall into the Mediterranean, and demanded an immediate miracle from God. He demanded that God at once send Yeshua death. Opening his eyes, he became convinced that everything on the hill was unchanged, except that the blazing spots on the centurion's chest had gone out. The sun was sending its rays into the backs of the executed men, who were facing Yerushalayim. Then Levi shouted, "I curse you, God!" In a rasping voice he shouted that he was convinced of God's injustice and did not intend to believe in him any longer. "You are deaf," growled Levi. "If you were not deaf, you would have heard me and killed him straight away." Shutting his eyes, Levi waited for the fire that would fall from the sky and strike him instead. This did not happen, and Levi, without opening his eyes, went on shouting offensive and sarcastic things at the sky. He shouted about his total disappointment, about the existence of other gods and religions. Yes, another God would not have allowed it. He would never have allowed a man like Yeshua to be burnt by the sun on a post. "I was mistaken," Levi cried in a completely hoarse voice. "You are a god of evil." Or are your eyes completely clouded by smoke from the temple censers, and have your ears ceased to hear anything but the trumpeting noises of the priests? You are not an almighty God. You are a black god. I curse you, God of robbers, their soul and their protector. Here something blew into the face of the former tax collector, and something rustled under his feet. It blew once more, and then, opening his eyes, Levi saw that, either under the influence of his curses, or owing to other reasons, everything in the world was changed. The sun had disappeared before reaching the sea, where it sank every evening. Having swallowed it, a storm cloud was rising menacingly and inexorably against the sky in the west. Its edges were already seething with white foam, its black smoky belly was tinged with yellow. The storm cloud was growling, threads of fire fell from it now and again. Down the Jaffa road, down the meager Hinnom valley, over the tents of the pilgrims, driven by the suddenly risen wind, pillars of dust went flying. Levi fell silent, trying to grasp whether the storm that was about to cover Yerushalayim would bring any change in the fate of the unfortunate Yeshua. And straightway, looking at the threads of fire cutting up the cloud, he began to ask that lightning strike Yeshua's post. Repentantly looking into the clear sky that had not yet been devoured by the cloud, and where the vultures were veering on one wing to escape the storm, Levi thought he had been insanely hasty with his curses. Now God was not going to listen to him. Turning his gaze to the foot of the hill, Levi fixed on the place where the strung-out cavalry regiment stood, and saw that considerable changes had taken place there. From above, Levi was able to distinguish very well the soldiers bustling about, pulling spears out of the ground, throwing cloaks on, the horse handlers trotting towards the road leading black horses by their bridles. The regiment was moving off, that was clear. Spitting and shielding himself with his hand from the dust blowing in his face, Levi tried to grasp what it might mean if the cavalry was about to leave. He shifted his gaze further up and made out a little figure in a crimson military chlamys climbing towards the place of execution. And here a chill came over the heart of the former tax collector in anticipation of the joyful end. The man climbing the mountain in the 5th hour of the robbers' sufferings was the commander of the cohort, who had come galloping from Yerushalayim accompanied by an aide. At a gesture from Ratslayer, the file of soldiers parted, and the centurion saluted the tribune. The latter, taking Ratslayer aside, whispered something to him. The centurion saluted him a second time and moved towards the group of executioners, who were sitting on stones at the foot of the posts. The tribune meanwhile directed his steps towards the one sitting on the three-legged stool, and the seated man politely rose to meet the tribune.